Just briefly, you might notice that we have two speakers on either side because the speaker system that is here is not working. It is working on PACTV, though, so I've been asked to ask everybody who speaks tonight to try to make sure you lean right into the mic so the folks in the audience can hear us. Okay, so Sean is away, so I'll be chairing the meeting this evening, and as typical, if everyone could just go around the room and introduce yourself for the roll call.
Hi, I'll start. Dave Johnston from Mass DP, and I'm representing Matt Beaton, EEA Secretary.
Jacqueline Horrigan. I'm representing Undersecretary John Chapman from Ocabra, who is Jay Ash's designee.
I'm Pat Charamel from the Old Colony Planning Council. I represent the Old Colony Planning Council.
Joe Coughlin, Town of Plymouth.
Pine Dubois, appointed by the Speaker of the House.
Rich Grassi, appointed by the House Minority Leader.
Bob Hayden, Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities.
Robert Jones, Health and Human Services.
Kevin O'Reilly from the Town of Plymouth.
David Nichols, appointed by Governor Baker.
John Orenberger, Entergy Pilgrim Station.
Joe Lynch, Entergy Pilgrim Station.
Jack Priest, Massachusetts Department of Public Health.
Paul Smith, representing the UWA, the men and women who work at Pilgrim Station.
Hi, Elise Magnato, representing Dan Wolf, appointee of the Senate President.
Okay. And I see Selectman John Mahoney is also just arrived. So let's dive right in. The first item on the agenda is a update from Entergy on decommissioning. Who's going to present? John?
Yes.
Is the screen not working?
It's not working right now.
And I assume we'll have the same issue with the whole tech update too then on the laptop? All right, so we're going to take a 2-minute break here then to see if we can get the audiovisual up and running.
All right, John Orenberger, NDCAP panel member, decommissioning director at Pilgrim Station. We had done a update at least one meeting, maybe 2 meetings ago. I think it was the July meeting on dry fuel storage. Just bring you up to date on what's going on with dry fuel storage today. Pilgrim Station continues with its dry cask loading. We started back in July. With the goal to get 17 loaded casks on the pad by the time this campaign was over with. We're at 15 right now, and the 17th cask is scheduled to be completed by the end of October. We had talked about the location of the asphyxie pad and what we would need there. We talked about the number of bundles, the number of fuel assemblies that we would have to load, and what we were going to do with those. Just to bring you up to date with the numbers, the current pad has 40 spaces, 38 of which we can use for the amount of casks. We'll be on the order of 62 casks total that we'll need to empty the spent fuel pool. So another pad is going to be needed, and we're evaluating that with a decision expected to be in October. We can go to the next one. 3 locations being evaluated. One is adjacent to the existing pad. One is southeast of the power block, next to the switch yard. That's the one that we had shown the map, and I have the map up here. If you want to move over to it, Joe. Tough to see, but the southeast one is behind a couple of outbuildings that we have at the station. That's the location number 1. Challenges for that, as you recall, are the underground utilities. Each cask, as it's loaded and transported, weighs about 360,000 pounds. There's a lot of buried utilities from the reactor building truck lock to that location, and that's a challenge that we would have to overcome to use that site. Additionally, for that particular site, we have overhead lines that are potentially going to be used in a contingency for powering the station during the Zerk fire and while fuel is in the spent fuel pool. So the overhead lines could interfere with that also. The square that's on the, or the rectangle that's on the left, labeled west in that picture, and I know it's hard to, but it's the one in the middle essentially. That is the addition to the current pad. Challenges with that is the elevation. Would have to rework the approach pad to that location if we put the new pad in, just from the slope of the current pad and the approach pad there. Another challenge with that would be future demolition of the facility. Close proximity there would cause us to have some challenges in the future for that location. And in the southwest, the one on the left, we're currently doing analysis, geotechnical analysis with that right now. We're boring holes in the ground there. We're up to 19 holes at this time. We're boring down to bedrock and doing a seismic analysis to make sure that the soils are good and that the pad, that the soils can support the pad in a seismic event. The thing we're looking at is seismic loading and soil liquefaction, and that is that the soil doesn't turn to some soupy, mixture and the pad would sink or tip in that analysis that we're doing. Make sure that that doesn't happen. Additionally, we have security requirements and evaluations that we're looking at there, radiological evaluations and environmental impacts for that location. If you want to go back to that, Joe. So those, a couple of other challenges for that would be the length of the haul path would be coming out to on that west side of the reactor building and traveling north towards the ocean to our shorefront area, turning west there and then heading back south. It's a fairly long haul path, nothing that's out of the ordinary for the industry, but once again, just a challenge that we have to overcome. Joe, you want to go on to the next one? And I think I'll be, any questions on that up to this point? Or we can take questions on that, on the update? Okay.
Thanks, John. A couple other topics we wanted to cover tonight. One, we typically try to provide an update on where we stand with the Pilgrim's Nuclear Decommissioning Trust Fund. The balance as of August 31st of this year is 1.09, almost $1.1 billion. Since the beginning of the year, we're up about $30 million in the account. That's a combination of market changes and fees that we have to pay, either taxes or trust fund fees. But we are on a positive. We have not taken any withdrawals from the Nuclear Decommissioning Trust Fund to this date. And then the last topic I wanted to cover has to do with some of the upcoming information that we'll be either providing to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission as part of some submittals that we're making in the fourth quarter and some work that we're doing on site. John Ornberger's group is developing what is known as historical site assessments. These are evaluations of past non-radiological and radiological impacts at the site. We're putting those into concise reports. They will be feeders into our overall decommissioning plan and inform the cost estimate for doing the cleanup of the site. In the fourth quarter of this year, we're also planning on finishing development and submittal of our post-shutdown decommissioning activities report. This is the overall decommissioning plan. We had covered that at an earlier meeting. That will include the site-specific decommissioning cost estimate. And then we'll also be submitting what is known as either the irradiated or spent fuel management plan. That's an ongoing document that we submit to the NRC on a regular basis. We'll be updating that with our overall plan for the treatment of dry fuel going forward, or spent fuel going forward. And then finally, we'll be submitting what is known as our commingled funds exemption that also will be scheduled for the fourth quarter. That's a required submittal so that we could utilize the Nuclear Decommissioning Trust Fund beyond radiological cleanup. And then lastly, I think it's been fairly well publicized, but next week, we along with Holtec will be providing a update to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in the form of a pre-submittal meeting. That's scheduled for September 25th. I believe it's at 1:30 in the afternoon. There's call-in information that's available either on the NRC website, or we can certainly provide that call-in information. It is a public meeting. Physically, it will be taking place at NRC headquarters down in White Flint, right outside of Washington, D.C. And with that, I'll take any questions on the overall update.
I'll look to the members to see if you have any questions. Sure, Rich.
For John. John, is the design basis threat for the seismic on the pad the same as the design basis threat that you had when the plant was initially built, or is it a new one?
For the pad, it will be a new design basis threat, or it will be a new design basis threat for security purposes you're talking about.
Right.
Yeah, correct.
Dave?
Yeah, question for Joe. For the documents that are being submitted to the NRC, is there a plan to share those with the committee, or to, some of them are probably really large and maybe don't make sense to share with the committee, but kind of what is your thinking about how that interchange should take place?
Well, certainly the PSDAR, the decommissioning cost estimate, and the irradiated spent fuel management plan are all public documents. The PSDAR and the DCE, decommissioning cost estimate, will be the subject of a 90-day public comment period. During that 90-day period, the NRC will also host a public meeting in and around the area of the site, likely right here in Plymouth. So those will be multiple opportunities for the NRC and the applicant to provide information, more detailed information to the public, seek public comment on it. You can also write in comments, but certainly when those are submitted, I'll provide them to the chair and have them distributed, to the entire panel. And I would imagine at some point in the future, we'll have a presentation to kind of detail what exactly are going to be in those documents. We'll be submitting our own, and Holtec will be submitting their version, so there'll be two different ones to learn more about over time.
Okay, I think as long as you're going to share it with the chair, it makes it easier than digging through the public document record online at the NRC, and so.
Absolutely. We'll make sure all copies are provided.
Pat?
Joe, in regards to the historical site analysis, what does that include?
So the historical site assessments are documents that summarize the history of spills and various events that we might have had during the operation of the plant, whether they were immediately cleaned up and documented, or whether they could not be cleaned up because they might have impacted operating plant equipment or undermined buildings. But what it does is it informs us as to what areas we would have to focus on during the physical decommissioning, and it would also ensure we have enough money set aside in our cost estimate to take care of them. So we do one for non-radiological spills, oil, things along those lines, and then radiological spills. During normal operation, part of the regulations, both in the state of Massachusetts and federal regulations, have us documenting that in a system, a file system. Under the NRC, it's called 10 CFR 5075 Golf or G. And so every time we have one of these events, even if we clean them up, we have to fill out paperwork, put them in our files. So we hired a consultant that is an expert at doing this. They looked at all of that documentation. They did walkdowns of the site. They interviewed people, and then they put these documents together. They're in the final stages of doing that right now.
Thank you.
Pine?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman. Joe, what is the process then for those? Are those shared with DEP? Are those shared with the public? Are they public documents? How are they used in the process of the site cleanup?
I believe that there'll be references in some of our other documents. For example, the decommissioning cost estimate, will utilize them again to inform the amount of monies that need to be set aside for remediation and cleanup. Whether they're going to be made public, I would imagine if they're a reference in the PSDR, they would be publicly available.
Is it possible for you to give like a, a summary document? I assume that it's pretty in-depth. Is it possible to do a summary document that says, our chief challenges are going to be, X, Y, Z, that you could share with the panel so that we could, have a better understanding of the challenges you face and potentially we face?
Yeah, let me take an action to see if we have kind of an executive summary that we can compile that has essentially the highlights of each of those documents in.
And then I had one more question. I think we had some discussion about the MOU, an MLU last time. Is there any update on, an effort to have an MOU with the state or several MOUs or whatever it turns out to be?
At this point, given the news that we are now working with, Holtec and their team as a possible purchaser of the site, we have just started a dialogue with the Commonwealth. We actually had a meeting scheduled for today to introduce the Holtec team to Secretary Beaton's office. That unfortunately had to be canceled due to the ongoing state of emergency that we have due to the gas issues in Lawrence and Andover. So we'll be rescheduling that, and I think that will be kind of the first steps, and then sitting down and determining how we would come up with some sort of an agreement if necessary going forward.
So it's your feeling that would be, an MOU would be with the state working group? Is that the way you imagine that some sort of, common understanding or consensus will be achieved?
I think Mr. Toomey at the last meeting talked about the fact that it may or may not be one comprehensive memo of understanding. It may be individually negotiated with each department. I think until we understand what the state would like, the Commonwealth would like, it's kind of hard to say what it's going to look like. But certainly we all agree that we need to sit down and work out and define, what each agency has in the way of interests in regarding our plans. So I think that'll all evolve over time.
Thank you.
I got one more.
Dave?
You had referenced commingled funds, and could you just provide a little more? I don't really understand what that is, and will there be a breakdown of how the commingled funds are used and kind of where they're coming from as part of this process?
I think Pam's going to handle that in her presentation. Essentially, the regulations, the way they're written right now, are very narrow on what the decommissioning trust fund can be used for in regards to an overall decommissioning. And this application to the NRC comes up with all the different cost structures that we believe should be taken from the trust fund, and the NRC has to review and approve that. It's been used at all the sites. This is not something unique to Pilgrim. It was approved in Vermont and many of the other decommissioning sites. But again, NRC regulations are not necessarily always written specifically for decommissioning, so on occasion we have to get exemptions from certain parts of the regulations, and that's what this is designed to do.
So at some point in the process, there's a breakdown of the commingled funds and kind of how they're used or where they're coming from? Or?
It will define what are the qualified uses for the trust fund in regards to decommissioning. Is it limited to radiological decommissioning? Can it include oversight of spent fuel, other costs that have evolved and become part of decommissioning as we know them today?
Okay.
Joe, just as a follow-up, you mentioned the September 25th. Could you share, when you get a chance, have somebody send that email out with the link to the meeting so we could get
Yes,
it out?
absolutely.
That'd be
Yep.
great. Thank you.
I'll send that to the entire panel.
I was going to say, Joe, are you going to make these PowerPoint presentation available?
Yes, yes. As soon as we're done, I'll send them to Sean and Kevin and make sure they're made available. And I think Kurt typically puts them up as
Right.
well
Correct.
on the website.
Correct.
Just went off.
Okay. Any other questions, comments from the board? Okay. I guess we'll move on to the Holtec discussion.
Okay, I'd like to kind of kick off with just a very quick introduction of the two individuals on my left, your right. To the far left, we have Pam Cowan. Pam is a senior vice president, and she's the chief operating officer of Holtec Decommissioning International. Pam's been in the commercial nuclear power industry for over 25 years, most of which were spent at nuclear utilities in various leadership roles. I actually worked with Pam when she was in licensing for Exelon. She is an industry leader in decommissioning and spent fuel management, having led a number of industry groups to inspire regulatory changes and developing kind of fleet decommissioning governance. Pam's education, coupled with her leadership roles in nuclear technology, spans both operational issues as well as emergency management, and has a strong foundation by which she is in her current position. Next to Pam is Mr. Chris Massey. Chris is a vice president of operations for the newly formed Comprehensive Decommissioning International. You heard about CDI at the last meeting. Chris provides over 35 years of nuclear cleanup experience. He has extensive waste management experience on both commercial and government projects, and is an experienced leader in reactor decommissioning strategy and planning. And with help from our folks here at the school, we'll probably put their presentation up next on the screen if we could.
What's your pleasure, Dave? Dan.
All right. We good? Okay.
Welcome.
I guess, Joe read a biography that was, supplemented within some other information. So just so that you folks know my background as well, I, in addition to what he read, I am a nuclear engineer by degree. I'm also a prior senior reactor operator, licensed supervisor, and was on shift in the control room down in Salem Generating Station in New Jersey for a while, as well as a corporate emergency director for Exelon. So I was the senior person in the emergency operations facility, implementing the emergency plan, and then of course, spent many years also near the latter part of my career with Exelon in developing the governance for the decommissioning model and working on spent fuel. So I just wanted to provide that as well so that you have a perspective that, I do come from the operations side of things, but I do have experience in the decommissioning end. And I'll just be honest, I'm super excited to be here, and I appreciate being here. And your town is beautiful, so I just wanted to say that. With that, we did prepare a presentation today to sort of walk through things. I heard some questions, and we'll try and answer, those questions as we go through it. And we'll start with a safety topic. Well, let's go to the agenda. Next slide. Okay, so we'll do a safety topic, then we'll briefly touch on the decommissioning process. I know you guys have had speakers in here before on that. We'll just recap that briefly. And then I'll get into our strategy for decommissioning, how we plan to do it, why we think it's a good strategy, a solid strategy, and how it's going to benefit Pilgrim and other sites, that we'll be involved in the decommissioning of. We'll touch on the regulatory submittals, and then talk about some of our current activities ongoing, as well as summarize everything at the end. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris to get us started with the safety commitment.
Okay, and I'd like to also thank you for inviting me here today. Just in terms of the safety, what we wanted to touch on was transition and change. It's something that if the deal goes forward between Entergy and Holtec, is something that is significant in people's minds now and will continue to be as we go through this period of time. And it obviously introduces a lot of distractions, potential distractions for people, and we have to stay focused as we go through this period, everybody does, to make sure that those distractions don't lead into any development of any issues. We're working that carefully with John and his team at Entergy today. We're going to talk a little bit about that as we go through. But really what we're about is keeping people focused on the job at hand, making sure that we continue, that we don't distract John and his team as they go through the conclusion of operations, that we actually have a transition that is open and transparent to the workforce and to the community based on good communications. That will be the key to us effectively going through a transition period with no issues as we go forward. So that's our safety topic that we wanted to share with everybody today.
So with that, I guess before we get into the decommissioning process, I did want to answer your question. You asked a question on the funds and what they entailed and some of the rules surrounding that. So the trust funds, are governed in the NRC regulations, and the NRC governs the radiological decommissioning. And they'll also now, they'll oversee the spent fuel management. But the trust fund itself was collected for the radiological decommissioning. And so the regulations are narrow in listing that as the sole purpose that the fund can be used for. The IRS regulations also cover decommissioning trust funds. The IRS regulations are broader. They allow for spent fuel management and they have a broader interpretation of decommissioning. But as a result of the NRC ones being narrow, folks have gone in over the years consistently to ask for exemptions. And the thing that you have to prove is that to get the exemption, you have to prove you have sufficient money in the fund so that you can show you can do the radiological decommissioning as well as handle the money that you would want to spend on the spent fuel management and the non-radiological decommissioning. It makes sense to go in and do that because a lot of times you'll have activities that are ongoing, and it makes sense to be able to holistically deal with the decommissioning. It's actually overall cheaper in the end if you can do it all together like that. But at the end of the day, it's something that the NRC has recognized through their rulemaking that needs to get actually added into the rules so people don't need to go ahead and do exemptions to allow it to cover all three. And so the rulemaking that I think you'll see come out in the next year or so, it does have that in there. Will cover the addition of spent fuel management and non-radiological decommissioning. And change the regulation. So it won't require in the future an exemption, assuming the rule gets approved, which it looks like it will, and moving forward, so, okay. But it does require that you have a certain amount. You won't get the exemption approved if you don't have sufficient money in the fund for radiological decommissioning, so. Okay. With that, I know that, I guess it's in 2017 here, there's a slide from when the NRC presented and talking about the decommissioning process, and it lists the Code of Federal Regulations 5082. And there are really two types of decommissioning. There's shades in between, but there's really safe store, where the philosophy is that you wait, you let everything sit and decay, you put it in the casks, and then you sit for the 50 years, and then on the back end of the process, you decommission it in the last 10 years or so. And then there's decon, which is where you promptly, you remove the fuel, and then you promptly decommission the site, do the dismantling and demolition, and then, basically you end up with an ISFSI-only site, and you sit there until the DOE takes the fuel, effectively. So with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about our philosophy, because what we're interested in mainly is the decon method. We think this is, good, honestly, to get these sites cleaned up. We think it's not a bad thing for the United States to have a strategy in terms of attacking, going after the various sites and making sure that they get cleaned up in a prompt manner. And so that's why we have an interest in this as a business. We think it's a worthwhile cause, and it will help the industry. I mean, I personally am committed to the industry. I'm second-generation nuclear. My dad was in the industry. So I really feel strongly that we need to do right on the back end of things and clean things up properly and promptly. So with that, one thing we have seen is over the years, you've seen different individual plants decommission. But what we think would be most effective on the back end, because it's pretty much, it's fuel, it's a fuel pool, and then you have a plant, and the operational piece is taken out of it. So from that aspect, it makes sense to do it as a fleet approach, if you will, to do it, put some standardization on the back end and how to approach the decommissioning. And that's what we would like to do. If you look here, we have the fleet-based approach. It's worked in operations very well. It's worked with Entergy, it's worked with Exelon, and we find that to be most efficient, where you build governance or you build procedures for each aspect of what you're doing. You utilize them as they can be for what is standard. You utilize them across multiple sites. And then as you hit questions or as you identify improvements, you improve the governance so that you can then, again, benefit from it at all the sites. And that's the idea behind our fleet approach. We want to do a fleet approach. We want to make standardized governance, recognizing that there will be unique aspects, and we will get those addressed, but that overall the fleet will improve through standardized governance. It also helps to drive lessons learned. If you have a lesson learned, you can incorporate that in your governance, and automatically, every site who's using that governance gets the benefit of the lessons learned. Again, seen at work in the operating industry. Maximizing the standardization, as I said, and then also, one thing that Holtec's very interested in is technology innovation. If you go to our website, you'll notice, over 35, 40 patents related to fuel technologies and other technologies. So effectively, we're super interested in technology, and we believe this is one of the areas that could really benefit from, robotics or other computer-aided technology, mainly because you can have, lower the risk, industrial risks, as well as lower any radiological or contamination risks by use of robots and others. So one thing we are interested in is looking at how we can work through this process and innovate all the while to ultimately improve overall, and then not just have those improvements or those robots or whatever used here, but also potentially, used overseas or wherever. So again, it's a passion of Holtec is innovation and technology and machinery, and so that's where we think will also benefit the sites. As far as, when we look at qualified and experienced personnel, so Holtec has expertise in used fuel, as you know, you've heard that. A lot of expertise in both wet and dry storage of used fuel, and probably the premier, one of the premier organizations in the understanding of fuel and fuel behavior in this nation. So from the fuel side, that's been developed. And then, but recognizing in order to decommission, we needed to partner with have partnership with someone who had the experience in decommissioning. And we know they were here, with the last meeting, you heard a lot about SNC-Lavalin and the partnership with CDI and Holtec. But we really believe that that is what uniquely positions us to holistically and comprehensively handle the site decommissioning most efficiently. And we look forward to that. And so, Chris's organization, I'll let him comment briefly on Atkins' history, but I mentioned Holtec's history, as well as Holtec recognized, we bring in people from the industry with experience, like myself, and basically to help cement and shore up, each area so that we're effective as a team and we don't, have huge blind spots. In fact, one of the gentlemen here with us tonight who's behind me is Russ Malore, and Russ is acting as a consultant. We have him at the site, and he was the president of two of the Yankee companies during their decommissioning. So again, looking to really capitalize on some of the expertise that's out there and holistically address the issues. Operationally, taking care of the operation and the fuel, as well as efficiently doing the decommission and deconstruction. So I'll let Chris briefly, because we met, through Project Zion, where he was doing the decommissioning, and I was with Exelon responsible for doing the oversight under the services agreement. So.
Yeah, I mean, just to build on some of the things that Pam was talking about there, and you heard some of this last time from an experience standpoint. Part of our experience has actually been fleet management of decommissioning plants. the individual who's here last time, Mark Morant, who's the CEO and president of CDI, basically ran a fleet of decommissioning reactors. They were in the UK. It was the first generation reactor fleet. There was 24 reactors in total. Under Mark's ownership, 20 of those reactors went through transition into shutdown and into decommissioning. And so we're very familiar with the transition of workforces, with the ability to basically set the plants up ready for decommissioning and to do accelerated decommissioning. That was further amplified, I think, in terms of what Pam just said from Zion. Mark was the individual, the executive in charge of Zion for a period of time while we were going through the decommissioning. That decommissioning is on an accelerated schedule. It's due to complete within 8 years. Involved 2 large reactors just north of Chicago. And so we bring that experience to bear in terms of all this as well. So this isn't our kind of first show. It is something that we're all passionate about. It's something that we want to do right, something that we've got a track record in, and clearly that's what we're bringing to Pilgrim as well.
So I just, again, I can't stress enough our commitment. This is not a once and done for us. We're looking to use this and move forward and decommissioning a broader fleet of plants. So it's in our best interest to do this and not just, do this well, but do this meeting all the regulations, do this safely, and do it as you would expect it to be done. So one thing is the nuclear plant personnel, going back into that. So one of the things that I think is very beneficial about what we're doing is we're doing it promptly, and when you do it promptly, one of the things we saw at Zion was it sat for 10 years, and then you lose a lot of the people and you lose a lot of the expertise because they just won't stay there. And when you go to clean up a site, well, we keep good records. We heard about the 5075G reports for the radiation spills. You keep good records, but at the end of the day, it's the people that make a difference. It's the people that know. It's the people that understand the plant and have the best ideas. So one of the philosophies that we're taking is that, we'll have our experience and we'll have CDI's experience, but at the end of the day, it's the site folks that are complement that. And so one of the things we're committed to is picking up folks from the site, bringing in folks from the site to help ensure that our knowledge of the site, of the area, of how best to deal with certain situations that exist at the site is taken into account. And we use their expertise. And we do want to use all the expertise we can use at the site. Rather than, bring in everyone external. And to have people stay at the site immediately following operations just benefits the whole process, because you don't have to recreate after the fact and try and figure out, wait, so-and-so always knew where all those things, happened or whatever. So again, good records, but there's nothing like experience to help complement decommissioning. We mentioned partnership with SNC-Lavalin, integrating the site organization at the license transfer. That's when it would happen. And then, and we do have people out on the site now to help, make sure that we're merging ideas and culturally merging, because we know that, once the close occurs, then we would be all as one. And then industry vendors. There's a lot of very experienced vendors out there, and so we plan on, utilizing them as well. There's GE, Westinghouse, others that have done a lot of work either in this country or other countries. So we're definitely going to be looking at them, for their expertise. And we believe that we'll be able to get very good rates with them if we go with the fleet approach, because anytime you have a fleet, you get much better rates and much better service. So. Finally, the procedures and processes. So one of the things about, again, coming in fresh when the site is just shutting down is that we would adopt the procedures and processes of the site so that it would be smooth in the transition. We'll look to adopt the E-plan and effectively from the site and also QA plans and other plans so that you have sort of a bumpless transition, if you will. We're using the procedures that are in place. And that makes more sense than changing everything for, a couple years. It just is more efficient and it's more familiar to the folks. Maintaining compliance, of course, with the, NRC and any regulations. maintaining and protecting and controlling the spent fuel, I spoke about that. And then ensuring environmental and personnel protection. So again, we want to be in this for the long haul. It does not help us at all to have any kind of event that would jeopardize environmental, personal protection, safety, radiological, and industrial safety. Okay, next slide. Okay, so again, I make a lot of the points here that I said from the other slide, and just to focus again on the benefits of doing it this way is it does use qualified decommission, recently experienced folks as well as experienced decommissioning team. We will demonstrate the decommissioning funding assurance, and we will have to turn in a spent fuel or a radiated fuel management plan. And any document that goes to the NRC, of course, is public, and you can get that from the NRC website, but we're happy to provide anything that has been sent to the NRC to you, that personally, if it's easier that way. Again, this accelerates the decommissioning and the waste removal from the site, so it won't take away the fuel right away, but it does take away a lot of the radioactive components a lot sooner than they would normally be taken away. And then targets an ISFSI only within 8 years. And I know that we're going to come in, I believe, sometime or soon to talk about fuel and the canisters and the fuel plans and stuff. And if at that time, they'll bring some pictures and they'll be able to show you, what the ISFSI only sites look like. But, they're beautiful, but they have the ISFSI there. So hopefully, ultimately, our goal would be to get the ISFSI, to get the canisters removed either to a permanent storage facility or to an interim storage facility where they can be stored together.
Can I just make a comment?
Yes, go ahead. You can.
Just one thing on that. I think at the last meeting, Pierre did invite everybody to come to the Camden facility where Holtec basically makes these facilities there in New Jersey. It's a very impressive facility. I visited it the first time 6 months ago. And I would recommend, if you get the opportunity, to take advantage of that invite and go and see these things firsthand, because it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it is impressive. And, Holtec does manufacture canisters for around the world. And just, and I'll diverge a little on tangent, but, just to tell you, Holtec has some extremely advanced processes, and that's because of their dedication to innovation. And one of the things they have is a forced helium dehydration, and that allows the moisture removal from the canister area in a very effective manner and a more rapid manner than normal. And what that's allowed is for fuel that's cold for a long period of time. Now, that won't necessarily be the Pilgrim fuel, but for fuel, that you've seen that's cold, so there's Zion or even over, in Chernobyl or somewhere that's sat for a while, that kind of technology helps to remove moisture in otherwise situations that would be much more difficult to remove the moisture because you don't have the heat to help. So that's where Holtec's come in and come up with solutions, not just for the country with used fuel, but also for, some of the world. So it's, again, we'd be happy to host you or show you any of the technology if you're interested. Okay, and then, and results in an earlier NRC final license termination. So if we go to the next slide, which is the, okay, now we're on the small slides, okay. Well, the next slide is it's basically a timeline. And the top timeline, as you'll see, is a safe store timeline. That's a typical safe store timeline. And that demonstrates that, that license termination completes in 2083. And versus on our planned accelerated decon schedule, right here you have the license termination at 2063. Now, the reason for that on this graphic, and I actually think will be better than that, is that what we did with the license transfer is we wanted to keep certain assumptions similar, so we assumed the same assumption for when the fuel would leave the site, when the DOE would pick it up. We actually believe that it will be before that. We think it will be moved before that for a number of reasons, including the progress that's been made on the centralized interim storage facilities and licensing, as well as, additionally in the Yucca Mountain space too. So again, it comes down to, I'm not sure the fuel will sit on the site till 2063. I don't think they'll come get it one stick at a time as it's ordered, or, mob and then demob and come back and try and get some more fuel and then leave and go to another site, which is currently the way the DOE has the queue listed. The DOE can pick it up in any order that they choose for a shutdown site, for a permanently shut down site. And so, it's our belief, just from what the NRC has said, that, what the DOE has said in meetings and stuff, that they will go after the shutdown sites first. My guess is they'll go in order of oldest fuel first, so you'll see probably Humboldt Bay or a site, like that go first, and they'll get all of the fuel, and then go to the next site and get all of the fuel, and the next site and get all of the fuel from the shutdown sites when they start picking it up. Obviously, if it comes to our facility and we have any say in it, it would be, we would obviously give preference to those sites that we're servicing. But again, I think in general, you'll see, if we can get, consolidated interim storage moving in this country, which there seems to be a push toward, then we can get some of this fuel from all the shutdown sites consolidated in one location. And that, again, saves on security and other costs, as well as maintains it, in a facility that, at least in the 2 cases that are being licensed now, closer to the permanent storage facility in Nevada. So, accelerates decommissioning as well from 2083 to 2027. So if you notice on the lower one, when you do it right away, we expect to be done in 2027. On the longer time frame, you would sit for a long time, and then you would not finish until 2083. So significant difference. Okay.
So just on that, the other big advantage of doing it this way around is right now there is an increased level of cost certainty in terms of what it costs to actually take these plants down, and that's because the existing infrastructure exists for waste disposal, for transportation, for the majority of the materials that we're talking about through the decommissioning phase. I think Pam has touched on people. The experience is there today, both from the plant personnel and the knowledge that they bring in terms of the plant and its operations in the past, as evidenced through the historical site assessment, but also through the D&D. There's been, several, since the mid-90s, there's been several major US nuclear plants that have gone through decommissioning, so there is a cadre of people right now who are experienced in doing this. Obviously, if you wait 50 years, those people are no longer around, probably. So anyway.
Okay. So with that, if we go to the next slide. Thank you. These are and I apologize because I know the slide is small, so I'll read it, but these are the regulatory submittals. So as you know, the required submittals, within 2 years of permanent shutdown, everyone's required to submit a post-shutdown decommissioning activities report. Typically, those had been submitted after shutdown or later on. More recently, folks are submitting those in advance of the shutdown, which is allowed. And the reason to do that is so that it can be as efficient as possible upon shutdown, where you can move forward. There's certain thresholds the NRC requires for use of the fund. So you can always use 3% up front for planning purposes. But if you go beyond that into actual deconstruction or movement of components or something, that's not allowed per the planning. And so then you get into the decommissioning funds. And to get the decommissioning funds released, you have to show the decommissioning plan with the cost estimate. And that's so they can ensure that, they're looking at it and they're monitoring or see how you're going to spend the funds. Once you do that and you certify you're permanently defueled, then you can use the decommissioning funds. Now, this isn't a quick process. The NRC comes in every year, and they will, require they will look at the decommissioning funds, the cost estimate every year. So it's anytime you take money out of the fund or you go to spend money from the fund, you have to notify them or let them know, not necessarily beforehand, but they will know that you've taken the money from the fund. And the fund is independently managed. Like, we won't manage the fund. It's managed by a third-party independent party. And there's certain thresholds required for what it can be invested in, so that it's not in some high-risk area. In fact, when we were working, with the Zion project, it ended up that money was taken out for certain activities for, out of one of the funds, and it started to rebalance the risk of the whole portfolio, and so money had to be shifted around so that the overall risk of the portfolio was below the threshold required by the NRC. So again, these funds are very, very well managed, as well as very well reviewed by the regulator and others. And nothing happens fast. So again, every year it'll be reviewed. So, so again, the post-shutdown activities, the site-specific decommissioning cost estimate, and that goes along with the PSDAR, and then the decommissioning environmental impact statement, as well as spent fuel management plan, and that's the irradiated fuel plan. We also will file an exemption request to permit the Nuclear Decommissioning Trust Fund to be used for spent fuel management, as well as for non-radiological decommissioning, and that's because the timing on the rulemaking will not suffice in this case. I think that's all I wanted to cover with the regulatory submittals, other than because of the way things are being done, we will go in jointly with Entergy. When we go in jointly to file our license transfer application in October, we plan on doing that. So we'll go in to file the license transfer application jointly. We additionally will then each have to, because the plans won't necessarily be identical, we would file a PSDAR, as well as Entergy would file a PSDAR. Now, whether we'll file them together or not, I'm not sure. I think right now we have them separate. They'll be filed within a short time frame of each other. But the idea is both of them reflecting the plan, whether or not the license transfer would go through. So Entergy will reflect it if it weren't to go through, and we'll reflect it for the decon scenario I've laid out here. Okay. Next slide, please. And so this tells you the dates. And as Joe mentioned, there is a public meeting next week, Wednesday afternoon, for this, and I'll be down there at the public meeting along with some others. Entergy and Holtec will be down there together for it. This will sort of outline what we plan on coming in with the license transfer. Now, if you want to know what the license transfer is going to look like, Oyster Creek, a plant that we just submitted a license transfer for a couple weeks ago, the license transfer burden is basically saying, hey, Holtec, why are you qualified? Technically, why are you qualified to do this? Financially, why are you qualified to do this? So a lot of that information is very similar, plant to plant. We don't change as a company. Our technical quals don't change. So if you want to get a preview of what really a lot of the submittal will look like, the Oyster Creek submittal is on the NRC docket. It's out in the public domain, and it has all our resumes in there and other required information, a lot about Holtec, how Holtec's owned, controlled. So if you're interested in that, that is available publicly right now, and I would expect that our license transfer submittal will look very similar. Again, this just gives you the dates. The one thing I will point out is that we are, the Entergy will request a license transfer application approval of 6 months of April 2019. And we think that's very reasonable, given that we'll have gone in with effectively a very similar application for Oyster Creek, and they will be familiar with the information. Next slide. So decommission planning activities. So right now, we're integrating the team. Again, in the public meeting slides, which we'll have next week, it will outline, and I believe that was outlined here to you, how we're set up with Holtec, and then Holtec Decommissioning International being the license holder, and then with CDI, or Comprehensive Decommissioning International, which is the joint venture, being the general contractor. So we're going to integrate the plant team with ourselves and Entergy. We have people on site here. We're going to apply, again, the Holtec governance plan where we can. I mean, Holtec has, QA models and others that are already in place, so we'll utilize a lot of that because it's tried and true, and also because it's more efficient, as well as creating governance specifically for the decommissioning over the next month or two. And then identifying risks and mitigations. So obviously, we've done a due diligence, but we need to confirm things such as, we had the due diligence on, say, the radiological material on site or whatever, and so now we're checking things and we're making sure that we fully review those. And then, normalizing the decommissioning projects and planning between the site and CDI, as well as establishing a detailed baseline schedule and cost. And of course, in doing that, someone brought up I believe it was something about the state. We fully, we were here today, and I understand the reason, the state could not meet today, but we fully intend to meet with the state and local officials to try and gain some common understanding on some of these issues and push forward. So, having not been able to meet yet, I can't, say a whole lot about that other than we absolutely fully intend to meet with them, and we did come out here last night, in fact, hoping to meet this morning, but fully understand why that had to be canceled. And then strategizing spent fuel management and ISFSI, again, looking at the various locations. You heard John talking earlier, so I won't repeat that. But again, if you look at the arrows at the bottom, and we'll just go to the next slide because I don't want to be completely repetitive, although I like to drive points home sometimes because I'm not sure how new or not new a lot of this is for you. So planning will continue through the license transfer. The topics of public interest would be, the submittals that are coming out and the regulatory filings. So, we've covered a lot of that today. We will have continued focus on safety and planning for future decommissioning milestones, and some of those are called out here. Obviously with the permanent shutdown and then the reactor being permanently defueled would be a major milestone. The end of the Zerk fire risk period would be another major milestone where you'll see things shift. And then spent fuel being moved from the pool to the pad, and we believe that'll happen within 3 years. Finally, the NRC license termination, the partial site release to ISFSI only, and that'll all be publicized at the time, when it comes out, and the NRC will hold meetings, and that'll be very public, how our plans are on that, as well as ultimately the ISFSI decommissioning and the license termination. So, said a lot here. I hope was informative, and if there's anything additional, I am absolutely more than happy to go through anything here, or take it and bring it back to a later meeting. So thank you very much.
Thank you
Appreciate it.
very much. I'll turn it over to the panel. Joe?
I had a couple of questions. Pam, I'm a little confused earlier in your presentation. I thought I heard you mention the IRS.
That's what I was
I hope the IRS is not involved in all this in any manner, but it was in relationship to the fund, and they do have some involvement?
The IRS has a regulation, and I'm going to get it wrong, 468 alpha or 486 alpha, but basically the IRS has a regulation over qualified trust funds. So for those parts of the trust fund that are qualified, and I'd have to check, I believe, we can check whether Pilgrims is one, but basically the IRS regulations, define what decommissioning is to continue to qualify that fund for the IRS qualified status, which is a tax rate of 20%, I believe.
So it's a pro forma.
Yeah. There's also, candidly, FERC also, for FERC jurisdictional funds, they have a regulation. It's like 18 CFR 35, and basically that regulation mirrors the NRC regulation with some of the decommissioning requirements and decommissioning fund requirements. So there's a number of regulations out there. The NRC one is the most, I would say, the most comprehensive and probably the most limiting.
All right,
So.
second question, thank you, Pam, is Chris had repeated the offer made in August to the panel to visit the facility in New Jersey. I'd ask that at our October meeting, maybe we take that up, see if there's interest from the panel in doing that, and because there's going to be some funds available for the panel, and with the new state interagency working group, maybe if there's interest in going down there and looking at the facilities and getting briefed down there, that the two groups could join. I don't know if there is such interest, but if there is, it would also give us a chance to get to meet the interagency working group folks. But if that can be brought up at the next meeting, I think it would be.
I'll add it to the agenda.
Final question is, back to Pam. I think you had mentioned that you all would ask the NRC for approval to use the funds for spent fuel storage, which has been used by other licensees also, or decommissioning licensees and so forth. If in fact you did that, would you follow the same practice as the other licensees have done in pursuing litigation against the DOE because of their failure to provide storage facilities under federal statute, and therefore the other licensees who've proceeded in federal court against the DOE, my understanding is, have recovered those funds, and if so, those funds could then go back into the decommissioning fund to be used for radiological decommissioning itself. Would you follow a similar process?
So, just to go back, so there's a, right, you have the contract with the DOE, and a lot of folks, you know, sued the DOE to recover costs associated, and they've won. And they've won, you know, it depends, it hasn't always been so consistent as to how much they'll win, but they overall have been fairly successful. The other path that a lot of folks have taken is to settle with the DOE. So in fact, the other plant we're working on with Oyster Creek, they have a settlement agreement, you know, Exelon has settlement agreements with the DOE. So we're looking at, you know, different options, what's best. Yeah, you know, of course, if we felt that per the contract that the DOE, you know, reimbursed for their failure to perform, you know, we would absolutely look at, you know, do we want to litigate? Would we want to try and settle with the DOE, have a settlement agreement where they agree to, you know, pay for a certain amount of allocations and they give you a certain amount every year? You know, you have to still put in for it, but related to that, yeah, we're looking at all different options right now. We have not made a decision on that area.
Can I just add something now? Can I just add something now, Mr. Chairman? Sure. So it's interesting that the NRC, through the license process and the PSDR and DSC, does not allow us to take credit for any recovery of monies from DOE. So,
what?
because it's a lawsuit.
Would you repeat that? I didn't.
You're not allowed to take credit when you demonstrate that you have sufficient funds in the decommissioning fund. You can't credit the fact that you'll get reimbursed by the DOE to demonstrate that you have sufficient funds. You have to assume that you won't get any reimbursement from the DOE. I mean, the NRC is very rigid, but, you know, again, what you don't have in hand, they don't allow you to credit. So much so that I know that when I was at Exelon, we had our Limerick station was in license renewal, and we went through a situation where with the Continued Storage Act, or the Waste Confidence Act, as some called it, basically all licenses were on hold. And so even though everything was approved for Limerick's license renewal, we didn't have it in hand yet, and it couldn't be credited to demonstrate the decommissioning fund was adequate. So we actually had to take a parent guarantee for a very brief period of time due to that. So, like I said, the NRC is very strict. They don't allow crediting of things that are not in hand. And I think, you know, that's very good for protection of the fund.
Jack?
My colleague, Mr. Smith, said he had a quick question and asked if you could go first.
I promise, Kevin.
Promise?
Thank you. Through the chair, thank you. Mr. Cowan, Mr. Massey, I was especially heartened to hear that the existing employees would be viewed as a valued resource.
Oh, yeah.
And my comment, it may be more for the good Mr. Lynch. Based on what you said, we're going to be using a fleet approach to decommissioning, and whereas this committee is used to, and I think the citizens of the Commonwealth have always held up the Yankee Row model as the model of decommissioning and what satisfies the state regulations. Do you see any drastic or dramatic differences in the sequence of events, the sequence of the decommissioning between Yankee Row and the fleet approach?
No, I guess the plan that was used there was very early on in decommissioning, but it became kind of a model, and I think a lot of other sites have used that same model. So you go through kind of a plan to understand what you have at the site through, your characterization work, and then move through physical decommissioning, and then you do some of the site restoration at the same time, and at the end, you do the final, state compliance type work. And I think the approach here, although we haven't gotten the PSDR completely written, would be very similar. So I think what Paul is saying is some of the lessons learned from there are likely going to be worked into the plan for Pilgrim.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, we have Russ Malore here, who was at Yankee Row and is on site and is consulting with us. So we are absolutely looking to learn lessons, from all the previous decommissioning experiences that are out there.
Thank you. Thank you, Jack.
You're welcome, Paul. Jack Priest, Department of Public Health. So I just want to reiterate that I do not view the Yankee Row project as the model for the industry for decommissioning. We're talking about a project from 30 years ago. We've had subsequent decommissioning projects with many more lessons learned. We should be looking at what is being decommissioned currently and what lessons learned and experiences do we have now. Pilgrim is not Yankee Row. I have a couple of questions. So the Nuclear Decommission Trust Fund, how often is that evaluation submitted?
Once you shut down, I believe annually.
Annually.
That's annually. And do the assumptions, standards, costs, growth, do those remain constant as they're submitted year to year?
There are regulations that govern how you have to, how you have to make the assumptions in terms of with escalation or other aspects of it, regulations and reg guides and stuff. So we'll be consistent with the required NRC guidance.
So clearly, as you go through the project, though, as you go through the project, then you've on one side you've got the fund growth aspect, and that's obviously governed by the requirements at the NRC, but you're also spending the money to actually decommission the plant, so they will change on a per annual basis.
Right, but I'm asking like the standards that you use in your initial assumptions for whether the plan is sufficiently funded. Those are constant, right?
They would be constant unless there was some new information that we learned that allowed us to justify a change or something like that. So it would be very transparent, what was assumed.
And would that most recent evaluation that was submitted be reflected in your transfer application and the PSDAR?
It will come in after, I believe, in the it'll come in October, I think. We said we're filing the decommissioning cost estimate. So it will come in. It'll be in this fall.
But the information from the last evaluation that was performed, is that the basis document that you're using for your transfer application and the PSDAR?
Go ahead, Chris, if you, because his.
Yeah, I would say partly. Some of the data that was included in the last application is being used, but obviously we're under a very different approach with regards to decon. It's the strategy that Pam has outlined, and so some of the costs will be different in our DCE, and you'll see that in the PSDR document when it's issued in the DCE document.
Okay, and I had a follow-up on the historical site assessment that's being performed now. Is that being done by Entergy or Holtec?
That's being contracted through Entergy.
And what, how is that being performed? What resources are they using? Are they using things like retirees, corporate knowledge? What documentation are they using to make that assessment? Because that input is a very large input into Holtec's application.
The contracted company uses the information that the station provides through retirees, through contractors, through everyone, people who are employed at the site for to get that historical site information. And they come up with they publish a report to us, we review it, go back and forth to make sure all the information is correct. We provide thousands of documents to them through that process. They have a standard template that they use and is, been vetted by the regulator for completeness.
That would be a very useful document for our site cleanup subcommittee. Will that document be made available, the summary document be made available to us?
I've already talked to Pine about this, and I told her that I'd get back to her about that, relative to that.
Okay, thank you.
Pat?
Pat Charmel with the Old Colony Planning Council. Pam, you mentioned that there's a possibility up to 3% of the funds could be used for planning. Could any of those funds be used for economic development to mitigate some of the impacts of closing the power plant for some of the communities around Plymouth and Plymouth?
So planning is defined in some of the reg guides, from the NRC, and it's really about, basically doing engineering analyses or preparation. I don't know of anything that specifically excludes something like that there's any guidance that specifically excludes that. I'm not sure that there's any precedent for inclusion of that as planning. The planning period, again, lasts until you actually declare you're permanently shut down. We expect to get the PSDAR in early, as does Entergy. So at the time the site shuts down, it should only be a matter of a month until you're permanently defueled to when we're able to access the entire decommissioning fund as opposed to just the 3% for planning. But from now until that time, my answer is I'm not sure on the history of that. I just don't know. Like I said, I'm not aware of anything that would preclude it, but I'm not sure that that would be read as included, per the current regulation or current reg guides.
Thank you.
You can look at that.
Pine?
Yeah, two questions for clarification, if you don't mind. When you were talking about the license termination, the 2083 and then 2063, and then you said 2027. I didn't hear what the 2027 date was in reference to. Was that when the cleanup is supposed to be done?
Yes, that's when the end of the end of the decommissioning, so all of the non-ISFSI related material is decommissioned.
So you expect all the operations basically to be done except for monitoring the ISFSI?
Correct.
Okay. And also you mentioned the need for a decommissioning environmental impact statement. Are you referring to something for EPA or what is that?
Go ahead, do you want to take that?
So it's actually an environmental impact evaluation that's required as part of the NRC submittals.
The NRC requires it?
Yeah.
And do you know when that will be done, and will that be a public document?
I think everything that we submit to the NRC becomes a public
It will
document.
be
So
public, and we can get back to you with when that'll be finished.
When? Okay, thank you.
Rich?
Yes, Rich Grassi, thank you very much for your presentations. I have a question that relates back to Joe and what Joe and John were saying. John gave a presentation about the spent fuel pool and the dry cast storage earlier, in which he indicated that there were 15 dry cast canisters on the pad right now.
Correct.
And that 17 were expected at the end of October.
Right. Yes, we have two more.
And we've got June 2019 as the closing date for the plant. Are you only going to put the spent fuel into dry casks up until the time the plant closes? Or will you be doing that afterwards as well? And I guess my question is, what sort of a role do you envision for Holtec CDI after the plant is closed in terms of following up on the spent fuel movement? And have you done that before? And will you be using Entergy's resources to do it, since they've been doing so many? I mean, you'll have about 35, I figure, casks remaining in June, or maybe less. How do you plan to manage that?
I can start if you want.
Yeah.
The current campaign that we're involved with right now, and we'll be completing at the end of October, fully demobilized by then, we use Holtec personnel to help us with that, along with our own people in-house. There are some general labor contractors that we use, but that campaign is, because we have a contract with Holtec for the canisters, that pool-to-pad operations does involve Holtec, and they are specialists in that operation. And like I said, we contract to them, and they work with us on that.
Okay. So in terms of June 19th, say 2019, you may or may not assume the license for the plant, am I correct, at that time? Until it's approved by the NRC?
Correct. It would need to be approved by the NRC, and then we would have to have determined it was, an appropriate time to transfer the license. We will not assume the license before, obviously, before the permanent defuel of the facility. The facility would have to have the fuel in the pool, and only after that would we be able to assume the license. And then that would be based on logistics with, any other loose ends tied up with the deal. But basically, we'd have to have the NRC approval first, and the fuel in the pool.
One follow-up, Kevin. So when you assume the responsibility for the plant, looking at it right now, not knowing when that date is coming, and having given us a date that you anticipate that the dry cask storage will be complete, or at least that the decommissioning will be complete in 2027, are you making an assumption that I guess the question I have is, at what point do you transfer from the suing the federal government to getting the ISFSI paid for out of the decommissioning trust funds, or is that something you take care of later?
Well, we have, I mean, candidly, we have plans, we have looked at this and how you would move the fuel, because part of, reduction in force at the site, reduction in staff at the site is getting the fuel to the pad, and that helps preserve the fund. So once you file the exemption, we can utilize the money from the decommissioning fund to help, make the decommissioning more efficient and moving the fuel to the pad. And so that would happen regardless, through the decommissioning fund. Then, depending on whether we decide we're going to go to litigation, whether we decide we're going to settle, or whatever the logistics are with respect to the DOE recovery, that would be separate from our plan, which our plan is to move the fuel, to the pad and as soon as we can get it to the pad safely.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you both very much for being here. Elise Magnato, I'm here for Dan Wolf, who's founder and CEO of Cape Air and also a former state senator for the Cape and Islands. I wanted to make sure that we understood correctly that you expect the license transfer from the time of application to it being approved to about 6 to 7 months?
For the NRC approval for their
Yes.
safety evaluation, yes.
6 to 7 months. And can you just elaborate a bit more, please, on what that process looks like with the NRC? And if there's opportunities for public comment or what the review process looks like?
I can get you all the details of the review process. I mean, I know that the NRC, they have the public meeting, the pre-submittal meeting. We'll go in there and we'll talk about it. And perhaps that's a question, we can ask at the pre-submittal meeting. But
And that's the meeting next week?
that's the meeting on Wednesday. And you can ask them that explicitly. I mean, they will be happy to go through their entire process.
Fantastic.
But basically, they are fairly transparent. They effectively tell you they're looking at whether you have foreign ownership or control. There's certain things you have to meet in the license transfer, and that's in the regulations. So you have to show that you don't have foreign ownership or control. You have to show that financially you're stable enough. You have to show that technically, you're sound and that there's a reason for doing so, why they would want to go forward and review the license transfer. So we, through our presentation, will explain how we meet that, and then they'll go ahead and have their individual experts within the NRC, they'll split it up and give it to their individual experts, and they'll review and they'll take a look at all of this, and then they'll come, effectively write an evaluation that says, yes, we approve, and they'll put that up, I believe, for rulemaking, and then that will get voted on. So at the end of the day, that's what we're looking at. If you want to see what something looks like I said, the Oyster Creek, license transfer is in the public domain. It's out there, currently on the website. If you want to afterwards, I can tell you how to get it. But basically, that would give you an idea as to how, what's in this type of an application. But they'll go ahead and review each piece, and then they'll make their recommendation.
Thank you.
And Elise, just to clarify, that we would request that date for license transfer, their review to be complete, and then that license transfer to take place. What the NRC ends up doing could be something different.
Right.
Yeah, and that would be just approval of the document that approves license transfer. One thing we do say, and this is similar with the other plant as well, is we will give them, a couple days' notice prior to actually transitioning the license once that's approved, when we go to implement, yeah.
Further questions, comments? Dave?
Yeah, Chris and Pam, thank you for being here, and I hope you'll be regular participants in our meetings as more and more questions from the panel and from the public come up. So I really appreciate you taking the time to be here. You had mentioned there would be 2 PSDARs, one from Entergy and one from you guys. Are they identical? And it's just a formality of submitting from separate entities, or are there differences between the 2 plans?
No, the reason we have to submit 2 is because, we can't presuppose that the license transfer will occur. So for efficiency, Entergy will go in and they will submit a PSDAR basically with the plan, and I don't want to speak for Entergy, but with a plan of something longer than what I believe we will propose with our decon scenario. So it won't be identical, and they will submit that because, again, they're the licensee at this point, and without a license transfer, that would be their plan, and, they want to, put that on the docket. So we would also submit a plan because we want to make sure the decommissioning is efficient. So, when we want to get the information reviewed and out there. And so our plan would outline our plans for basically what I presented here, the decon scenario.
So your plan would probably give us a better perspective on what's going to happen, assuming the
Yes.
license goes through. We have no reason to believe it's not, right? So if
I
we're going to
believe-
review
I-
documents, it's probably going to make more sense to focus
Yeah.
on yours first. No offense to my Entergy friends, but
That's all right.
to get a really kind of a good sense of what's likely to happen.
Yeah, we have reason to believe, we think we're good candidates. We would like to see the license go through. We think it's the best thing, in general. So for the site, and not just this site, but for the other sites, to have it decommissioned like this. And so, yeah, I would say that, if you assume the license goes through, transfer goes through, then yes, ours will be more reflective of what will happen.
Okay. And then my other question, there's been talk in previous meetings about the security zone around the plant and how that changes when the plant stops operating, as well as the emergency planning zones that are, I guess, prescribed outside of the plant, whether it's 10 miles or I think is the current radius, and the interactions that take place between the plant and the local communities. You guys led with safety, and I'm glad that you led with that, because I think that's probably, one of the areas of interest for the public. Could you talk a little bit about your philosophy and what that planning zone should look like, what that safety zone should look like, at least while there's fuel in the pool, and how you plan on interacting with the local communities?
Well, clearly, I think, I believe the NRC guidance and the scheme that the NRC has protects public health and safety. Obviously, a reactor that's shut down and with fuel in the pool versus in an operating reactor is magnitudes lower in terms of risk. So then you get into, well, what does that look like as you decommission and as the fuel cools off in the pool? So, it's not when the fuel actually goes to the pad that you would no longer have a need for, say, the off-site emergency preparedness as determined by the NRC. It would be when when you're beyond the risk of a Zerk fire. Because at that point, you don't necessarily need the response, from the off-site responders as rapidly as you did prior to that point. And that's the point at which the off-site response is no longer, as we've seen with others, no longer required by the NRC. Given the right exemptions or given, the new rulemaking that's coming up. I believe that does protect the public personally. I truly, I think the NRC is adequate in protecting the public in that manner. I know that in decommissioning cases, there have been discussions, say at other sites, between the site or the owners and the local public as to what might be helpful, because it's not just necessarily the actual risk, it's the perception that, hey, we're keeping an eye on the site and stuff. So I recognize that is also important, and that's where, we are going to engage, again, with the state and the local communities appropriately to make sure that we get the right balance, I guess, in place to make the public feel good and as well as protect the public, which I think is adequate through the NRC regulations. Sure. Security is a little bit different, and obviously we won't get into all the details. I did hear the question with security on the design basis threat, and the design basis threat, for those of you that maybe aren't as familiar, is that set of tactics defined by the government that the adversary can impart on a site. And that will change, obviously, as weapons, get better or something like that. And that's decided through the government, what the design basis threat is. We will definitely, as a licensee, meet the required protection against the design basis threat. And the NRC does, again, inspect that area and does maintain, an eye on that as well. So, we will fully comply with the requirements of security. I actually, security is obviously not as transparent for a good reason, because you don't want to explain to your adversary exactly how you're going to defeat your adversary. But at the same time, it is highly reviewed by the Nuclear Safety and Incident Response part of the NRC, and they do require, depending on the level of risk, require certain security postures. So.
Thank you. Thanks.
I'd like to follow
Okay,
up.
last one before we get into public comments. So, Jack, you can have the last
Thanks.
question.
I wanted to follow up on the comment about emergency planning zone and safeguards. So the NRC talks about that reduction, and this is to the panel too. So the NRC talks about the reduction in the emergency planning zone, and they're focused on that design-based accident, the zirconium fire that we spoke about. So that's the worst case. Design-based would be the worst case probable potential accident. But our emergency responders would need to respond in the community for any release of radioactive material, whether it exceeds a design-based scenario or not. So we want to make sure that we work with Holtec, if they're the eventual owner of that facility, to ensure we have adequate resources and protection for our community, not just for a design-based accident.
And, Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, the Entergy has been attending our regular, me and Joe, attending the regular working groups for all the town emergency planning personnel, the FEMA and MEMA on a monthly basis. We've presented the emergency plans. The emergency plans for post-shutdown and post-defuel have been submitted to the NRC for your perusal if you want to. And we've answered all questions that they have, and we have a regular working relationship with them. So we're in communication with all the EPZ towns, along with MEMA and FEMA.
Thank you. Chris and Pam, thank you very much. Are you available to take questions from the public? We usually dedicate the last 25 minutes of our meeting to questions and comments. And following Mr. Mullins' past practice, can I see a show of hands of how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we have 25 minutes left, so we'll start to my right tonight. So, Mary, I guess we'll start with you. Could we get a microphone?
Oh, sorry. Do you want to, there, take the mic. Use this one.
Hello there, Mary Lampert, Chair of the, Co-Chair of the Nuclear Advisory Committee of the Town of Duxbury and Director of Pilgrim Watch. My husband and I wrote a series of questions, and I believe you got a copy of them, and in preparation for the meeting of the 25th. And it was addressed, the questions were addressed not only to the Entergy participants, but to Holtec and NRC. And so here we will request a formal written answer to those questions, because I have not heard any responses that respond to those questions tonight. I'm recognizing they were detailed, but I want to focus on one point. Whether it's Entergy or Holtec, there is a buzzword. Whatever the regulations are is what we will follow. And so as far as something that's so important to us, the radiological cleanup standard, how clean is clean, the NRC standard is not what the state or the Mass Department of Public Health or a whole list of environmental and health groups from Physicians for Social Responsibility on down feel is acceptable. Now, the question is, then, when you submit your PSTAR, your cost estimates, it seems most obvious you are going to put the NRC standard for unrestricted use, 25 millirem. But that's not less than 10 millirem, which is in the Memorandum of Understanding that Entergy hasn't signed. No indication you're going to sign it and meet the 4 millirem for groundwater. So I think it's incumbent upon more citizens, incumbent upon every member of this committee, of Senator DeCimito, I pronounced that wrong, I don't know why, and the Board of Selectmen to say, step up to the plate and require a regulation by the state demanding what is in the MOU, because then there is a regulation for you to follow, and so we can get an honest estimate, and you will have an honest estimate, how much it's going to cost, how long is it going to take, so we get what we know we deserve. And so, are you planning, number one, to have the property released for unrestricted use, or are you considering restricted use, which then would be 100 millirem or up to 500? So what is your plan? Restricted or unrestricted?
Well, I guess.
That's a yes, one or the other. Just say one word.
Well, obviously we're coming into this and we're going to look at things. I mean, it would be, we would like to do unrestricted, but at the same time, it comes down to we'll have to fully vet anything.
In other words, you don't have an answer.
Well, I don't have an answer tonight for you, but I will tell you this. I did see your questions, and that was quite the comprehensive list of questions. And I did actually start in my mind trying to write, how we might look at them. And there were a lot of considerations, so appreciate that. But and I am aware of the desire of certain individuals or some folks that desire it to go to a lower level than the 25 millirem. I will say personally, I think the NRC's regulations protect the health and safety of the public. Having said that, though, we are here, and we came here today to talk to the state. I mean, we are interested in opening that dialogue, and we are interested in coming to some kind of understanding and agreement on what, it looks like the site at the end of this. Does that have to be decided today? No, we do have some time. And so we
in
wanna be
talking to this
thoughtful,
state,
so-
are you talking
Yeah.
to Secretary Beaton, Secretary
Yes.
Sutters, the governor? Who?
Today, our meeting was with Beaton. And we were meeting with Beaton initially because my understanding is that there's multiple agencies within the state, and the state desires to get coordinated, and that office will be the lead agency initially. That's my understanding. I could be wrong with that.
Yeah.
So we are just looking to come in and talk, because I think through dialogue, we'll be able to have a better understanding of what the right solution is for the state, the community, as well as for us.
And so now everybody has heard where we're at. Therefore, it underscores for the public and for elected officials to be to press for Mass Department of Public Health to establish a standard, or we know where we will end up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, before the
Yeah.
next speaker
Mhm.
gets up, I'd just like to make a comment. I think it's important that the panel make some sort of a decision on some of the comments from the public. I think it's inappropriate for the public to be trying to pressure guest speakers to make on-site decisions and commitments on things that are very complicated processes that is involving the Commonwealth, the panel, the new interagency work group, and so forth. The public, I think, it's fine for them to provide their views, their comments, ask their questions, but not to try and badger the people who are speaking here or force them into making commitments that are just inappropriate for this venue.
Well put, and I would ask also if you could keep your questions. I'd like to have questions and not to try to take time up from other folks, so if we could get right to the point when you come up, that way you won't be taking time from other people, I'd appreciate it.
There is a very well-recognized principle in planning that there are three potential ways you can conclude a project. You can do a good job, you can do a quick job, and the third option is a cheap job. It's also well accepted you can only do two of those three. And it is very clear from everything this panel has heard that the choice made by the NRC, by Energy and Holtec is cheap and quick. Good job, all people will say is, oh, we'll follow the regs. Well, we've given you enough paper, and you've read enough paper, and you've heard enough people to know that the faith that the NRC regs will in fact protect the public health and safety is in many people's view an utter and complete fantasy. Let's recognize one thing. Holtec, or an LLC, is going to buy this. They're going to take over the Decommissioning Trust Fund. What will the assets of this purchaser be? A plant they have to decommission and $1 billion in a trust fund. How do they make any money? By making sure that there's a lot, or as much as possible, of that $1 billion left over. That is not assuring to anyone who lives in this area, and frankly, it shouldn't be. In terms of the NRC regs, recognize that NRC's history, as it's writing its new rules that I hope most of you have read, does nothing other than decrease what has to be done across the board. Let's also recognize that there, in fact, may be a lot of NRC guidance, but it's not regulations, and there is no requirement that they be followed. This panel, the interagency group, and the NRC need to ask a lot of the hard questions, and you need to press for answers. Question was asked over here tonight, what about this money you're recovering? The question also asked, will you put it into the DTF? That was not answered tonight, but this panel has been told before that the answer to that question is we're not required to. So we can take money out of the DTF, we can take it out for spent fuel management, we can take it out for taxes. God knows there's a laundry list that we have given you of things that Energy has taken it out for and wants to take it out for in Vermont, and there's utterly no requirement to replenish it to be sure that the finances are there. There are a lot of questions that this panel has to ask, NRC has to ask, and the interagency group has to ask, and I truly hope that you ask, press for, and for a change, get answers.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mike Fortini. I'm also an engineer, however, not a nuclear engineer. However, I spent my whole career working for EPCs and AEs, not decommissioning plants, but actually building nuclear plants and upgrading nuclear plants worldwide. So I guess I'm taking a little different approach. My concern is that Holtec is part of this consortium with SNC-Lavalin creating CDI. Will clearly understand the importance of empowering an individual at the site who will be able to make the decisions on a daily basis to interface with the stakeholders, of which obviously the town of Plymouth is one of the most important. I understand the fleet approach, but I understand the necessity that hopefully that you'll keep key employees will be there for the duration, that you'll not be cycling them out of the process. So that's really my concern.
Yeah, I do want to make a comment that we do plan on reinforcing having a strong safety culture, and part of that is, you know, folks are urged and encouraged to raise any concerns or thoughts that they have. So I don't want to, you know, while we will be reducing staff, obviously, as the decommissioning goes on and we no longer have the need for such a large staff, we will always encourage folks to bring concerns forward, as is the standard with nuclear plants in general, so.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Good evening, NDCAP members and Holtec CDI guests. I want Richard Rothstein. I have a similar professional background as Mike, and I also was heavily involved with nuclear emergency preparedness planning following 3 Mile Island. I want to expand upon David Nichols' question about the dual PSDARs, and I have to believe that the NRC would like to see a nuclear power plant that's permanently shut down decommissioned sooner than later, assuming all the financial issues and a whole bunch of bells and whistles are resolved. And I know Entergy would like to see Holtec CDI take over the license and decommissioning. So my question to Entergy, would it behoove Entergy in their PSDAR to try to show the maximum timeline for decommissioning to contrast the 8-year window that Holtec CDI is planning, to try to nudge NRC, at least from that aspect?
Rich, thanks for the question. I think what Pam presented in those timelines were a typical safe store scenario. I'm not saying it represents what Entergy is putting together. We're still developing our PSDAR, but we'll certainly have more information towards the end of October, which I think is the targets for submitting those, and we'll be able to go in more detail over our schedule, what assumptions went into it, cost estimates, things like that.
I wasn't trying to pry, but I am. But to me, it would make sense for Entergy to show a long decommissioning timeline to help encourage the license transfer, assuming other prerequisites from NRC's standpoint could be satisfied in that regard. Another related question for both Entergy and Holtec CDI is with the, I understand the reasons, as Pam mentioned, about wanting to get a PSDAR submitted sooner than later, but given that the proposed NRC decommissioning regulations are slated to come out, the upgraded regulations, by the end of this year, would it make sense for Entergy and Holtec to hold off, maybe submit in January or February rather than middle, later fall, early winter in that regard, just to get more information on what are the proposed regulations? I know we know what we think they're going to be, but I know time is money too, but this might help save a little bit of time in the long run too, as far as being able to know what target you're trying to hit as opposed to trying to guess about that at the moment.
Can I'd just like to, the NRC rulemaking, I don't believe is expected to be issued until late next year. with
The
implementation.
final, but the proposed was supposed to be the end of this
Yeah,
year.
so basically, it wouldn't be available in the time frame we would need to,
Okay.
to really start doing the work. And again, you know, it's more about the efficiency and moving forward, so,
Okay.
yeah.
Last question. Back in the 70s, I know NRC was requiring seismic class 1 fill to be used for certain systems and structures. And since you're looking at 3 possible locations for the additional pad from the slide tonight, if the hydrogeological studies that Entergy is doing show that there could be some potential issues in that regard, but there's a better site, notwithstanding that, would bringing in that type of fill help solve that kind of problem in terms of the stability of the concrete pad?
We'll certainly look at all engineering solutions for either elimination or mitigation of any issues that we have, excuse me, including the geology, dose, and security.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Rich. I saw one other hand that came up. Oh, we have 2 hands.
3 now.
Oh, okay, well, I'm gonna have to cut your times down a little bit, because I didn't see three other hands. I was only planning on 5, so we'll start here, but if you could keep your comments brief. Nope, the woman in front of you, please. I'll ask you to keep your comments and questions brief, please.
Hi, I'm Henrietta Cosentino. I'm a local resident, and I very much want to affirm the concerns that Mary and Jim had about radiological cleanup standards. I think it is a very important issue, and I urge the panel to insist on some answers and on the Commonwealth's authority to set reasonable standards for unrestricted use. Secondly, and I'll make this very brief, there's another urgent issue that I have not heard addressed, and it very much disturbs me. Hurricane Florence right now has caused the 2 reactors in Brunswick, North Carolina, to be an island. It has flooded the entire island on which these 2 reactors stand, and to such a degree that the entire staff has been evacuated, and it is in a state of hot shutdown. What happens when Florence comes to Massachusetts? In terms of, above all, in terms of the IFSCI, the dry cask pad that is sitting 150 feet from the shoreline, with currently, I believe it is 15 dry casks on it, they are so vulnerable to not just to saltwater erosion, but also to all kinds of other accidents, that they must be moved. And I just haven't heard any assurance from either Entergy or Holtec that there's any plan to move them. This is just simply unacceptable. This is a disaster waiting to happen. So I implore the panel to put your minds to that, because that is an immediate and urgent situation that requires redress. Thank you.
Ma'am.
Hi, I'm Diane Turco with Cape Down Windows, and I just have some questions just regarding emergency planning. I know at Santa Onofre, Holtec was transferring waste, and there was a near miss there. They've stopped transferring the fuel into the casks right now because of that, and the NRC had a special inspection because of that. So there's serious issues going on with the transfer. And I do know that each of those dry casks will hold half the cesium that was released at Chernobyl. So this really requires serious emergency planning beyond the site. And I think the safety panel and the working group recommended to keep the 10-mile emergency planning zone when it closes until the waste leaves the site. Will Holtec respect those kinds of that recommendation from the panel?
I think, candidly, we're going to consider, a lot of recommendations, obviously, and we're going to, pardon me, this way?
No, go ahead. I'm just telling her to come on
No,
up while
I
you're
just
speaking.
want to say that, we are open. So we are interested in hearing different viewpoints, any recommendations, the basis for those recommendations. And then, we'll have decisions to make. Do we have any of those decisions right now? No, not necessarily, but will we consider, and take under advisement different points of view when we make them? Yes. So I'm just saying, we haven't been at this for 10 years here. We're coming in, and I don't want to be rash in coming up with answers on the fly here. So I do appreciate the gentleman who said, give us some time, because we would like to consider different points of view and make those decisions.
Okay, this will be our last question for the evening.
Can I say one thing, though, about the casks? Because I don't want to leave that on the table. I mean, those casks are robust. Casks are designed to withstand different events. And we understand, deliquescence and the different, saltwater effects on casks over the longer term and stuff. And those are even addressed. So, having said that, we are doing what we can. I mean, we're licensing a facility in New Mexico. We are trying to help, move the casks to an interim storage locations and not have the casks be here. But at the end of the day, we believe the casks are safe. And we're also looking at different options to relocate them on the site. But we believe they're safe, from, analysis where they are now as well. So, okay.
Okay. You identify yourself, please.
Susan Carpenter with Cape Town Windows. I would like to clarify something. I'm not sure I understand, but I know that Holtec has a lot of assets. They've got a platinum rating. SNC Lavalin has been around since 1910. They have a lot of assets. And I'm wondering if it's correct. I'm assuming that you are forming the CEI together, and that the money from the decommissioning will be put in their hands so that the assets of the other two will not be touched. Is that correct?
Not exactly, no. The CDI, which is the joint venture between Holtec and SNC Lavalin, will be the general contractor. So they'll be the ones hired to do the work. That company will do the work. They will put in for reimbursement for the actual work they do in decommissioning at the site from the decommissioning fund, and they will put that into Holtec Decommissioning International, which will be the licensed operator and responsible to maintain the trust fund and determine, validity of the charges against it. So the trust fund will be used for decommissioning activities, but no, they just won't be handed the entire trust fund. The general contractor will not be.
SNC Lavalin and Holtec could be held accountable also?
They will be held well, the licensed operator will be HDI, which is not SNC Lavalin at all, and they will hold the license, and so they will be ultimately responsible to ensure the trust fund is maintained in accordance with requirements, regulations by a separate entity, et cetera. So,
thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. I'd like to thank everybody for coming. Thank you again. I will echo the other comments of the panel. We look forward to working with you as we move forward. Before we adjourn, there are two housekeeping matters. One, PACTV has asked me to remind the viewers at home that this will be replayed, this meeting, in Duxbury on Comcast, on PACTV there, Comcast 15 and Verizon 39, in Plymouth on Saturdays at 7, in Kingston on Comcast 14 and Verizon, I think that says 11, Sundays at 8 p.m. And I know that our next meeting, we usually meet, our next meeting is scheduled for October 17th here, but I do have a request from Entergy, if the board is amenable to it, to moving that meeting back a week, given that this facility is available, but I'll check on that tomorrow. I think there are some presentations that they might be able to make and some more information regarding the new pad sites. Is that correct, Joe?
Yes, Mr. Chair. If the panel can tolerate moving this out a week, it would give us additional time to put together our final recommendation on the location of the second pad, but more importantly, it makes available some of the people that we need here to make that presentation. So if the panel is able to, again, tolerate a change, we would request a 1-week move to October 24th if possible.
If I hear no objection to that from the board, I will endeavor to schedule this location for the 24th at 6:30. Okay.
Hey, Kevin, before you adjourn, as long as you're talking about scheduling, as I look ahead in November, I think the meeting in November is the day before Thanksgiving. And so we may also want to postpone that meeting a week so that we don't interfere with Thanksgiving holidays.
Well, that would be the 15th.
Right? The meeting in November would be the 21st.
It's the third, I'm looking at Thursday, Wednesday, right?
Yeah.
21st, yeah.
So push it to the 28th so that people don't have to interfere.
Again, unless there's an objection, we'll schedule the October meeting for the 24th and the November meeting for the 28th. Okay, and then I'll await a motion to adjourn. Second? All in favor? Thank you, everybody.
October meeting, 24th.